Thank you. For those in the audience, how many of you cook or enjoy cooking? Now, all of you will know there are two kinds of cooks. One kind of cooks, they enjoy following a recipe. They like looking at the exact measurements, often watch videos now that they are available on YouTube, and they follow it ekdam theek thak. You know, everything has to be measured. Their kitchens are the ones that have these little cups and bottles with measurements on it. And there's another set of cooks who just do it instinctively. They just have a feel for it. They just look at somebody cooking and learn. Now, I'm of the second kind. So when I first heard of Sai's book, Step Up, I thought, oh my God, one more self-help guide. That's what self-help books do to people. You know, they just tell you the commonest of things that you would know otherwise and then just pretend to tell you something that is of deep insight. But I thought, because a friend had asked me about this, and I trust the friend, I said, let me look up Shai's work online. I Googled Shai, and I found many very interesting bits and pieces, fragments of her coming together. And then I started reading the book. Parts of what I was thinking changed then, because I realized that what she has done with this book is taken from years of her practice, almost jisko kehte hain na makhan nikalna from a certain kind of manthan. She's done that and put it in very easily understandable practices, short stories, case studies, language, created frameworks that will enable any of us, leader or not, women or not, to reflect on how we think, what makes us believe in certain things, how we react to the world around us, how do we inhabit this place that we live in. So with that, I want to ask the first question, and as I was reading, I was thinking, Sai, why this book? What made you write this book? You've been practicing for so long. You've been a coach, you've been a teacher, you've worked with various kinds of women in different kinds of leadership positions. What made you feel that all this experience, all this insight had to come together in one place like this book?
Sure, thank you, Arundhati, for a very sweet sort of introduction to this conversation. So I've been running women-only groups since 2010. And when I started running these groups, they were just publicly announced groups. I just met a whole lot of really brilliant, talented women who seemed to be, driving their careers with the brakes on, rid with self-doubt, navigating sticky, conversations and situations at work, navigating sticky conversations back home, where they're often having to give up their aspirations and their dreams. And in doing that work, Arundhati, I just realized that a lot of the women whom I was meeting were unaware of their limiting patterns and their self-limiting ideas and beliefs about themselves as well as their world and the world of work. And I just noticed that as...
But were they cognizant of it?
No, they weren't. Okay. They weren't, yeah, and they were just moving along. And I just realized that through the work that I was doing, when these women were beginning to get and understand their inner landscape better, which is all of these ideas and beliefs that they didn't even know exist, when they understood that inner landscape, when they began to get some of these tools, I found the movement in their lives and careers was immense. And this was what then prompted me to take this work, from the public spaces where I was doing it into the corporate world, because a lot of, courses and work with women were just skill-based. Nobody really had self-awareness as the cornerstone of leadership. And I say that in my book. The self of the leader is where you lead from. And if you don't even know what that self is, what leadership, right? And so that wasn't the direction of a lot of the training and development within the corporate world. And so in a way, that's what I started doing. I started taking this in and just found that it was so transformational, group after group, year after year. were just changing and, moving in leaps and bounds in terms of, towards their dreams and, their aspirations. Many of them, even igniting ambition that they didn't know existed. So that was really the genesis of the course Step Up, which I put out, in 2018. And then I really started, when I put out the course, Arundhati, I found a whole lot of organizations choosing women to send to the courses. And that was really, again, getting to me because I said the choice needs to be with women, right? And so I just said what would allow even bigger access to this work. And that's how, I decided to just write the book. So that's really the genesis of this.
But also there, a related question to that, what were the kind of difficulties of, because when we talk about, I work in the arts, right? And I know anything that is practice-based, when it has to be transformed into a particular language, text, a book in that format, there are dangers, there are difficulties, there are challenges. And so I'll just ask this question, was there any moving it from your practice-based work with people, when you look at then placing it in a book, what are some of the challenge, risk, dangers that you may have had?
I really didn't see any challenges or risk, Arundhati. I wanted to write a practice-based book, right? Because I think being a psychologist and a therapist, we know that sometimes, and many of you in the audience may have realized, sometimes we get a lot of things in our head. Yeah, you agree, and tell me how many of you can relate to this. We get a lot of things in our head, we understand a lot of things, and yet we cannot put it into action. Yeah, we cannot put it into action. Yeah, how many of you relate to this? Yeah, and this is so common, right? That we have insights, we have ideas, and yet the action just doesn't come forth. And I find that the beautiful part of a practice is that it allows insight and awareness to get translated into action. Yeah, because finally we are all what we have practiced. Yeah, and we have practiced whatever it is that we are doing today, we have practiced it. That's why we do it so well, including the limiting ways of living our lives. And so the practice-based book is really about changing practices. Without changing practices, any amount of understanding does not show up as a transformation in our life. So I really didn't see any challenge. I was very happy to put in a whole lot of practices that I saw that worked with a lot of my clients. All those practices are in the book, so people can, use it and support themselves. Yeah.
And coming to that, to the content of the book, there are so many things that you deal with, some of which really spoke to me are things like the way you talk about language, and then the language that you grow up with, language that we use. Then there's a large part of the book that deals with the body, the mind, the emotion, and how all of them are affected. Like how does your body change with the way you're experiencing the world or the way you want to respond? So I was wondering, what do you see as the, let's say, major issues that women leaders at different stages face today? And how do you think this book might make it slightly easier for them to navigate or negotiate that minefield that we walk every day?
Great question. My work with women has shown me that there are some very repetitive patterns in terms of how a lot of women especially function. And I have to tell you that I've written this book for women, but there are so many men who are reading this book and who are writing back saying, I don't know why you're saying women, I feel I'm reading about me. And so to them I say, yes, a lot of these patterns are very prevalent even in men, but I think they're super prevalent in women. So that's really what I mean when I say they're far more existent in the lives of women. So I noticed some of these patterns, Arundhati, which I find very limiting, and especially in the career and work world, it is very, very limiting. So let me tell you some of these. So one pattern is what I call the need to be, pleasing people. And from this need to be a pleaser comes so many difficulties. The difficulty with saying no.
Is it the same as like approval seeker?
Yes.
Yeah, it's the same.
It's the
similar.
same. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I talk about it in the book as, this need to be pleasing, and so we cannot say no. We are unable to, speak up. We're not able to say what we want to say. We are hesitant. We are, blow where the wind blows. We're unable to take a stand. And all of this is very, very significant when it comes to leadership. So this is a very prevalent pattern, which I find as I coach even leaders in the 15, 20-year-old bracket, I'm still dealing with this. And this is interesting, that I'm seeing it in the, in the mid-careers. I'm also seeing this in the, in the more experienced leaders. The other pattern that I see is really what one, which I talk about in the book is just I can't, which is like a passivity. It's almost like I'm waiting for someone to invite me. I'm waiting for someone to give me something. I'm basically waiting. Yeah. How about putting up your hand? How about saying, I'm here and I can do it? I find that is so difficult. And those of us who are successful have done this. Leaders who have arrived there have done this. But this is such a limiting pattern. The other is what you and I spoke about when we were sitting outside. The need to be perfect. Yeah, following perfection rather than, excellence, or saying, I'll play with this and let's see what comes out of it. And therefore, this...
There's a perfection paralysis, right? So
yes.
You can't move because you know it can't be perfect.
Yes.
And you can't begin because you know it won't be perfect.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you're telling yourself, I don't know enough. I have to know it all. I have to be right, and I have to even say what I've say only when I've got it perfect. So this is really, again, very limiting because especially in today's world where everything is so ambiguous, there is no way to know. We don't know everything. Yeah, and yet we have to move in the world, navigate it, and walk where we don't know. So how does one do that if one is trying to get it all right? Yeah, we have to be willing to play with it. And I find that playfulness is often, not there because of the need to get it perfect. So these kind of patterns, Arundhati, I really find are so limiting because it really stops you from that leap that one needs to make because you don't even know that these patterns exist, but they're playing out every day. Yeah. Whether it's, with colleagues, teams, meetings, it plays out all the time. So I think these were really popping out for me, and that's really what I have written a lot about in the book, also in terms of describing language and, how girls and women are socialized, especially in our culture. A lot of this is very, very encouraged and stroked. And so that then becomes part of who we are. The other question you asked me was how can people...
How can this book then, help women who are dealing with some of these issues? Yeah. Some of it may be we may already know, but find it unable to do anything about it. And in some cases, we may not even know it. So how does this book help us to, isolate those issues, treat them as, see them as specific things that we have to work with?
Yeah, I think the cornerstone of the Step Up book is having self-awareness. It's like move from blindness to beginning to see first. Yeah. So a lot of us are just blind. We don't even know the lens through which we are looking. So I find that a lot of people who are reading, are writing back saying, you're talking about me. I don't know them. But of course, the stories are stories which are representing, yes, that they relate to. So I think the first is to just be aware of this pattern. When you read, you can see that, okay, that's me. Yeah. So I think self-awareness is always, I find, the first rung. And then, of course, there are practices in the book. I talk about what I call green practices, which I find are like mantras that we have to adopt for our everyday life. And I tell people, if you do a prayer every day, then make this one of your prayers, if that's what you do. And if you don't do a prayer, and if you do some other kind of practice, make this one your practice. Yeah, don't step out of your home and, don't start your workday without some of these green practices. Because what we're doing here is really reprogramming, in some sense, Arundhati. We're changing the narrative that is held deep inside our mind and our bodies. And for that, we need an everyday approach for it. So there are a lot of those practices in the book, which are all green practices for people to start adopting and, beginning to shift. I would also say that a lot of the people in their mid-career are writing in back saying that they're finding, the initial sections on the body and the language and these limiting patterns very, very valuable because they didn't see it before and now they're seeing it.
Because they're reading it as somebody else's experience.
Yes, and they're relating that, this is me. I am there sometimes. I am like this in meetings. This is how I show up with my boss. This is where I'm unable to speak. They're just identifying themselves. So I think a lot of them are finding those sections of the book very, very valuable. And they're also finding the last section of the book, which talks about tools. I talk about the 5-finger solution. So that also they're finding very useful because it's just something that they can get up and start doing. That's what tools are for. But I also have another section, Arundhati, which are the 15 plus years experience, 20 plus, who are writing in saying that there are some chapters which talk about our purpose and finding what you deeply care about as being very, very significant because they're at a certain place in their professional life where this question becomes ever so important because we are finite and so is our time.
And I guess at that stage, they have nothing more to prove to anyone else, anything.
Yes.
And that's the time to sort of say, so what do I really want or what do I really care about?
Yes. Yeah. And the question really in that section, and there are some lovely exercises for people to do, is to really ask yourself, what do you want to commit yourself to now at this stage in your life and career? Yeah, because we are finite and we can't be spreading ourselves thin, doing things that we don't really care about. So I have found for my own self, this is such a powerful question, right? And I have got off doing a whole lot of actions and activities because I don't care about it. It doesn't matter to me. They're not life-giving or satisfying in any way. And so this has been, a very important question that the book has brought for women in that, in that stage in their career. And I find a lot of them also find the section on presence and the body very, very significant. Because in some ways, I'm talking about it as, as being really the place of great information. Information from the outside, but terrific news from inside, which we're not listening to the broadcast at all, right? And so presence and the practices around presence that I talk about in the book, I think just that whole mind-body approach, is quite unique, is very valuable for them. And interestingly, even the last section of the book, which is tools, which I said the mid-career were finding very helpful, I think a lot of senior people are finding it very, very helpful. Because I find even once you are in a place of power and, in a place of, you've arrived somewhere, even in those places in life, there is always a more powerful request that you need to make, either to your community or to your boss or to whoever. Yeah, and I find there is always, even at that stage, a leader that says, what is the bigger promise that I want to hold for my team? What is the bigger promise that I want to hold for my organization? Yeah, and that stretch and expansion is relevant even at that stage in career. And I find a lot of them find, one of the tools there is declaring. And I find even at such senior levels, we still hesitate to declare a lot of things about ourselves, about, what we're going to do. So I find it's interesting, but they still talk about, that's really interesting. I think I'm ready to yet again hold a bigger promise, yet again make a bigger declaration. So I find these seem to be sections that are very valuable. And I would say, use this book like a workbook. Don't read it as fiction. It's not something you'll read on a weekend. So it's something that you'll just chew on slowly, work through, take some ideas and, go the next day and try it at work. I think this book is that kind of book which you would use, over a period of time. It's a slow burn, surely. And so like this book, came out in November, I'm only now beginning to hear from people back, which I'm glad, because I wasn't expecting to hear from them in end of November or December. I would have been disappointed. But I started hearing much later, which is great. And I think it is to be used in that way, slow. Because I think transformation and what we have practiced all these years is not going to go like that. So
before I come to the last question, as you were talking, this just struck me that often, work like this, practices like this, or even books like this may be criticized from the point of view that does it in some way then make the woman responsible for everything that is happening in her life, where she's in a context where systematically or in the larger infrastructure, there are so many injustices already there. So does it take away the burden from the system and place the burden of proving only on herself? Now, of course, this criticism has its, loopholes, etc. But I will place it to you, say that as somebody who practices this and is the author of a book like that, what would your response to that be?
Many of you who've got the book today, will see some of you I've written on, I've signed there. And I say, be the designer of your life and work, right? I don't see it, Arundhati, as taking away, from, the burden, from society or from elsewhere. But I really think that, especially women, I say that especially women, we are very much comfortable and used to being the clay. And I'm saying, be the hand. Be the hand that shapes the clay. Yeah, we can't continue to be the clay. Because I think a lot of the problems that we're talking about have come from just being comfortable being the clay. Yeah, so I really think, as human beings, we have great agency. Yeah, and I think our agency is meant to be used to be designers. Yeah, designers of life, designers of work, design anything that you want to be and wherever you want to go. And I really think it's really besides the point what everybody else is doing. Yeah, I think if you, really take your agency seriously, then I find these are the leaders that I'm really writing about and that I want to influence. And then I think you just move and navigate the world, however sticky it is. So.
Okay, so last question before we move on to the next section. And this is something that's also a very personal question for me. In a world where the Me Too movement has shown us how angry, upset, and truly vulnerable the younger women today are still feeling. And the workplace, it seems the more it changes, the more it remains the same. In that context, people like me closing in on 50 often wonder, didn't we do anything right? Didn't we set anything right? Because if we did, would there still remain so much discrepancy, so much violence, so much anger? So if we find ourselves, and it's a question that sometimes keeps you awake at night, sometimes it doesn't. But my question to you would be, what would you say, being in this practice for so long? What is your, I don't know what to call it, but word of advice probably to future generations of women leaders? Where do you see this heading to?
Again, a great question. So I think, Arundhati, I go back to this question that I talked about earlier, which is, what is it that I deeply care about? Yeah? In life, also at work. I find this is such a vital question, because when we are taking care of what we care about, then it is life-giving and satisfying, and it is the absolute fuel for ambition. Yeah. So if we have to hold ambition, and if we have to expand ourselves, whether we are 30 or we are 50, or, I remember, someone asking me, and she's probably in the audience here, yeah, the people who help us with our finances, and she said, till when are you going to retire? I said, I'm not going to retire. I'm already doing what I love doing. I can do this till I'm 80 or whenever. Yeah. So I really feel what you care about is that fuel for ambition. And I really would like more and more, especially women and aspiring women leaders and existing women leaders, to really get in touch with that ambition. We need it. We need it for all the work that is to be done in the world and the many things that you talked about. Yeah, we need it so that our anger and our, is channeled so that we have, the energy to make those changes. So I really think ambition is really significant. The other thing that I would say is, more women need to show up and speak up, yeah, rather than shrink back, which is, again, a very prevalent pattern. And I think more of us need to be saying, I can and I will, much before we are ready for it. Yeah, we're not going to wait and say, yes, I have it all, now I know it all, I'm ready, someone will invite me. No. Yeah, I think I can and I will do this has to come much before, even as we're hesitant and it's not coming out of our mouth, we need to get that out. Because I really think that's very, very important, especially for all aspiring leaders and the younger people who are really wanting to get somewhere. This is a very, very, I think, important practice to start doing. And the last one, I would say, Arundhati, is not just for women. I think it's for all people who are leaders. Yeah. My wish is that all leaders be more in touch with the feminine side of themselves. Because I think the feminine, and we've heard this before, the feminine, the future is feminine. Yeah, my take on that is that the feminine principles, whether it is nurturing, whether it is, faith in the collective, collaboration, our creativity, balance, more for everyone rather than being solo. And I really think these are fabulous feminine principles, which I find are needed socially today. Look at what's happening. It's required in our teams, it's required in organizations. So I really think this is for any leader. Yeah, if you're a woman and you're not in touch with it, then get in touch with it and trust it. Right? Because there are enough women leaders who are not in touch with it. And a lot of my coaching work, that's the work that I need to do with women, because you're leading like a man, right? So women, get in touch with it. And I would say to the men in the audience, you have a feminine side, get in touch with it, celebrate it, and begin to really see what fits for me, and navigate the world with that. Yeah, it's no longer a place where I can look in a book and look at and say, what did predecessors do? No, I think we need to ask ourselves, what does this situation need now? What is calling? What is calling me? What is coming up for me inside my mind and body? And move from there. And this, I think, is very much the feminine principle. So I think, for all people, I would say, this is really important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sai.
Thank you. Thank you, Arundhati. We'll just stay here, yeah.
Already have on stage Arundhati Ghosh. She is the Executive Director of the India Foundation for the Arts. Arundhati has received recognition from several quarters for her work in the non-profit sector. In 2010, she received the Global Fundraiser Award from Resource Alliance International. She sits on various boards and advisory panels, including those of the Beyond Sight Foundation, Mumbai, the Siegel Foundation for the Arts, Kolkata, and the Museum of Art and Photography, Bangalore. She speaks and writes on arts and philanthropy for leading Indian and international non-profit and cultural networks. She also has a degree in classical dance and is a poet in Bangla. Dr. Rohini Srivatsa. Dr. Rohini Srivatsa is the National Technology Officer and Strategy Lead for Microsoft India. Her 25-year career spans R&D at AT&T Bell Laboratories and strategy consulting at the Boston Consulting Group and IBM Global Business Services. Rohini was recently recognized amongst the top 10 most influential analytics leaders in India in 2019 by the Analytics India magazine. She serves on the Scientific Advisory Committee for the Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. Rohini has earned her PhD in computer engineering from UT Austin and holds an MBA from Wharton. Preet Abraham is an Arjuna awardee, an Asian medalist, and is the director of NEB Sports. She is a national champion in 3 sporting events, is still competing in the Masters Championships at the international level, and is the current world and Asian gold medalist in triple jump in her age category. Rupa D. Modgil is an IPS officer from Karnataka. She unfortunately is maybe a little late, so we hopefully will have her shortly.
Thank you, Reva. Thank you, Reva. All right, lovely. When Arundhati and I started initially talking about this event, I told her that I didn't want it to be some typical book launch kind of thing. I wanted it to be a more stimulating and provoking evening, an evening where we can reflect and connect back with ourselves and take something away rather than just hear about a book. So together in some way we thought of this idea of having leaders from different domains and to begin talking about what it means to step up. So that's really how this evening has come about. Thank you, ladies, for being here and being in this conversation with me. So I think the first question that I wanted, each of you can share, because I really see this as an evening of stories, and stories can be very powerful, yeah? Saying our stories is powerful, but listening to stories is equally powerful because it begins to inform and change our own story. And so I really thought it would be lovely to hear from each of you what has been a moment of stepping up for you in your professional life. And if you could share what is that one significant moment that stands out for you of stepping up, and why was it significant for you? And perhaps, you want to point out to us, what aspects of that stepping up process or journey or action was really important for you, because I think we have, quite a mixed audience here and also a lot of younger aspirants. So I'd really love for you to point out what has been so significant for you. Arundhati, maybe you can just go first. And then we can, we have mics here for each person.
Yeah, I would say, so I work with this foundation called India Foundation for the Arts, right? I joined the foundation as its first fundraiser in year 2000. And before that, I had a corporate career. But then went through various, and the foundation was like 5 years old, 5.5 people, the half was me, part-time. And I went through different kinds of roles in the foundation. Long story short, 2011, the board tells me that the first executive director would retire in 2 years and we would like you to do this. It wasn't something that I was expecting. The first executive director was a man, 21 years older than me. He was the person who set up the institution from scratch. I had worked with him long enough to know his strengths and limitations. He had an amazing reputation, both excellent and difficult. And my question was, how do I fit into this picture? Like, I don't. He also had he was a very erudite, learned person, came from within the arts. His name is Anmol Velani. He's a theater actor, he's a wonderful writer. And I learned so much from him. So my point was, I'm going to get into those shoes with both kind of trepidation and kind of both fear and wonder at the same time. The point was that we differed in many things. His was the Gurukul style of functioning, mine was I was always a comrade, more of from the street kind of person. But something told me I need to step up. Something told me this is what I wanted to do, nothing else. And I thought the worst would be that I'd fail. I'd fail my trustees and I would fail, and then they will anyway throw me out, right? So I didn't have to worry much about that. So I took it on, and that's 6 years, and it's amazing. The 3 points that got highlighted to me, the first one was I spent too long figuring out how to sit on that chair rather than imagining what my seat would look like. In fact, it's not even a chair. It's a multicolored beanbag sort of a thing on some dari on the floor. That's where I like sitting. So it is not even a chair. And I spent so much time worrying about how would I sit on that chair. The second one was I was very worried about how the world would see me. Would they think that I'd be good enough? I'm so much younger. I don't have that much experience. I realized very soon the world didn't care. The world would see me the way I would show the world myself. The world would look at me exactly how I presented myself. If I said I knew, they would think I know. If I said I didn't, they would think I didn't. The third thing which really struck me was that this is something I faced in the corporate sector and later working closely with corporates. Every new CEO has to come and erase everything the previous person has done, good or bad. I mean, you talk about kings, they built temples over temples over temples. You talk about CEOs, they like you suddenly hear there's a new policy and restructure, re-strategize. So one thing I had learned was that leadership was about both continuity and change and knowing what to do with which one. Which one do you want to continue and which one do you want to change? So for me, the stepping up had these three highlights, essentially.
Beautiful. Yeah, lovely. Awesome. Very, very succinctly put. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, Reet, love to hear what you have to, what was your story and stepping up moment?
Hi, everybody. For me, it's a totally different story compared to Arundhati's because there I think you have some kind of set patterns for you to excel and follow something. But for us, I would say my profession was an athlete, professional athlete. And for us, when I started in the 80s, though I started in the 76 when I was a 12-year-old, when I started competing and representing the country, it was in the 80s and mid-80s, which went up to the 90s. There were no women who were participating in sports in our level, that is representing the country and international level. So there were no set rules for us, what we had to do and where we had to go and how we had to do it. It was just pure passion that we started what we wanted to do. And in Mysore, where I was studying and born and brought up and living with my parents, it was people called it the glorified village. There were no facilities whatsoever, but we didn't have anything to compare. There was nothing that we could say, okay, this is bad, this is what I need. We made the best of what was available. And me and my sister, I have 4 other sisters, but me and my immediate sister, who's just a year younger to me, we used to cycle to the track every morning and evening. We didn't think there was anything better. But now if you see, the parents have such big responsibilities. They have to drop the kid, pick up the kid, or have a driver designated to follow their passion or any extracurricular activity. So for us, it was, even to the extent of digging the long jump pit ourselves or marking the track to lay our hurdles. But we didn't crib. That's what was expected out of us. And now as it's all laid out on the track, I mean, it's a synthetic track. It is marked for the kids. You just have to carry the hurdles, leave it there. The long jump pit is dug. But to drive our kids to do that is impossible. So for us, it was pure passion. And I never, ever imagined that I could get a job through my sports career and I could represent the country. I didn't even know what it was when I started. It was only later when I started training and going to the track every morning and evening. One of the coaches said, 82 Asian Games is coming up, and that was late in the 70s. And he said the 82 Asian Games is happening in Delhi, and I think if you train well, you can represent the country then. And then I can say my life changed because I had to go to Patiala to attend the national camps. That was the Institute of Sports, National Institute of Sports, which we called it the godforsaken place. Because for us, coming from decent families where, everything is, we have, decent beds to sleep on, decent food to eat. We had to go to a place like Patiala where we had to share the rooms with 10 other athletes and share 2 bathrooms. But there was nothing better that we knew. So we didn't crib about anything in our lives. And at that point of time, the only thing I wanted to do was wear the India blazer and represent the country and do well. Wow. So we didn't think there were bad times. And everybody there was from a different background, but when we trained, we were like, we don't like you at all, we don't want to see what you're doing, I'm the best. But when we're back in the room, we are great friends. And times changed. There was no support from the government at all. We had to fend for ourselves. And then I was offered a job by Corporation Bank, and that was great because they would support me in some way or the other, and I had money for me for my expenses and training and my equipments and kit. And along the line, it was just not training that I could do, but I had to work in the bank. There were only a few privileged sportsmen like the cricket players who would just go to the office wherever they were working. They were told you can sign and leave, but we didn't have the privilege. But I didn't want to do that either because I knew my life as a sportswoman was short, and I had to learn my job, whatever it is, if I want to follow that as my career or want to do something else in life. So I would work in the bank from 10 to 3, and from then I would go directly to the stadium sometimes and walk out on the track from 3 to or 4 to 5:36. I remember when initially nobody said anything about it, but my colleagues later got a little jealous, and they would say, "Oh, you're so lucky you can leave the office at 3 and go home and work out and things like that." I said, "Well, I'm lucky. I've got some kind of talent where I can prove to myself and the rest of the country that I can do something. But I would challenge you, at least one day you come to the track and do 10% of what I'm doing. Because it's tough." And the biggest challenge for me was to balance my life. I had to cook, I had to train, I had to work, and it was difficult. And that made me a very, very, very strong person. And I think as women, that's what we are special at. We learn to do so many things, and we don't crib about it because we think that's our life. It comes easy for us to do, multitasking. And the other part was, at one point of time, I missed my qualifying mark for the Asian Championships, which was happening, and I wasn't selected to represent the country. Though I was the best in the country, they had set qualifying standards for us to meet, and if you didn't qualify, you cannot represent the country. And that was, just few centimeters in long jump. And I was very, very upset about the whole thing, and I said, I don't want to do athletics anymore, and I got pregnant. But during the course of that 9 months, or just when I was just 3 or 4 months pregnant, it's like depression. You can't train too hard, and you can't do anything. You have to go to work, come back, cook, and that's it. So it's a totally different lifestyle that I was leading. And then I decided that I hadn't reached my targets or achieved my dreams, what I had to do as an athlete, not even 60% of what I had to do. And I decided that I would make a comeback. And how, I did not know. Because there were very few, there was no internet, there was no television or anything. Television was there, but to get that information, we didn't have internet. And I'm thinking that I'm really blessed that I was born in the 60s, that we didn't have the internet. Because if I did, then we would keep comparing ourselves with the athletes overseas, because they have so many facilities. Even to the extent of not having proper athletic gear to wear. I remember when we competed, we didn't have proper shoes. Bata shoes, the power Bata shoes was what we trained with. And we didn't complain. But now if you want one of our kids to start any kind of a sports program, first is they want a shoe which costs about 8,000 or 9,000 or 10,000 bucks, which is Nike, Adidas, Puma. So for us it was, and even to the extent of not having a sports bra. It was really, but there was no sports bra available in the country. We used ordinary cotton bras and, bras which had the cotton strap, not on the elastic one, because if you wear an elastic one, then when you run, it's not a good sight. So even to that extent. But as the days went by, all of us got really professional, and banks, Tisco, Telco, the oil companies, everybody started recruiting sportsmen, and it grew, and it became really professional. But at one point of time, you have to decide what is good for you, and your priorities change. For me, winning a medal in the country was not a special feeling anymore. There was on the top all the time. I was a national champion for close to 12 to 13 years. But that didn't give me a good feeling at all. But I knew if I had to win a medal at the Asian level, then I have to work that much harder. I was growing older, and then I had a daughter to take care of. So it was getting tough. But during pregnancy, what I did is I set a standard for the women athletes to follow. So even till about 10 days before she was born, I was jogging and stretching. People would think I was crazy, but I did it. I remember speaking to my doctor, Dr. Mari Mutana, and she said, Reet, as far as you're comfortable, you can do what you want, but just don't overdo it. Don't push yourself. And it was a normal delivery. I was back to stretching and running when she was 30 days old, because I had decided that I had to make a comeback. So when she was 30 days, I started my training again. And it was very, very, very tough. The body goes through so much. I was amazed myself, because before pregnancy, I could do ab exercises about 200, 300 at a stretch. But after that, the doctor said because it was a normal delivery that I could start my exercises within 5 days. And when I got to doing it, I couldn't do one. So that's what your system goes through during pregnancy and delivery. And when she was barely 10 months old, I went for the national championships, and I won a gold in long jump. So that was the standard I set for the women athletes in the country. And after that, they would call me and say, what did you do? How did you do it? Who helped you? I said, nobody helped me. It was just my mind that told me that if you want to do it, you can do it. Yeah. That's the only thing. Whatever you set for yourself and what you want to do with yourself, it's all in your mind. It's not that it was easy for me. There were so many constraints, so many. But I wanted to do something, and I did it. And then when I was not enjoying the bank work, but I had no other choice. What would I do if I quit? I didn't want to do anything else, which was, the corporate kind of job. I wanted to do something related to sports. And I remember it was almost about 12 years since I was working in the bank, and the pension scheme came by and said, after 20 years of working, you would get a pension. I didn't sign up for it. I said, I'm not going to work in the bank for another 8 years to get my pension. But I really got fed up of that. It took me another 12 years to really have the guts to quit my bank job and do something in sports. Because those days, we didn't have too many opportunities. And, who would give me a job? Because I've been working in the bank for so long, I didn't want to do anything else. But sports was zero opportunities. Compared to what the kids have these days, they can just, decide to quit their corporate job and do something what they like. And that's really amazing. So finally, about 7 years ago, I quit my bank job. I got a pension too. And now I'm part of a sports management company which organizes marathons. It is really fulfilling now, and it's still part of the athletic associations and federations where we're trying to change things, but that's still not happening. Things have not changed in a big way, but I feel most people say it's a waste of time to change the system and the situation in our country. But I would say if all of us put our hands up and say nothing in this country is going to change, nothing will change. There is no future. But we have to keep fighting for the change in our country. And I keep telling the kids, there are not many teenagers around, but it is their future. And if they don't look around and say that we need to do something to change, And I think consciously, if all of us do our job, it's going to be a better world for us to live in, right? So for me here, being here, it's very, very special because I would like to congratulate Sai for her wonderful book. And she's my niece, by the way. So it's really, I've seen her from the time she was a baby and how she's grown into this wonderful woman, and it's amazing. So for me, being here is really special, and I always, when I'm in schools and colleges and corporates, tell the women that there's nothing that you can't do. If you can learn to manage your life, balance your life, it's the best thing. There is nothing like, I have to be at work all the time, or I can't do anything at home. Our kids need us. So when we are at home, you devote your time there. And at work, you just learn to shut off what is happening at home and devote your time at work. Yeah. And I think as women, we are wonderful at that. And whatever you want your lives to be, wherever you want to be, you can do it.
Awesome. That's not one step-up story. That's lots of stepping up stories. And as I'm sitting here, I'm just thinking, isn't it weird talking about stepping up to somebody who does hurdles? Just like sitting there. Strange question that I asked. But yeah, thanks for that so much. Rohini, love to hear what's stepping up for you.
So I love to come to events like this because you get to hear such inspiring people. Yes. and get to see different facets of life. So it's really very inspiring. I would say that so I've been in my life through in the world of technology, and I would like to think of myself as a hardened warrior in some ways, because the world of technology is there are very few women, especially as you grow to more senior ranks, and it's a long haul. So you need to have a thick skin, and you need to know how to get up after falling flat on your face. So I think I specialize in that in particular. And yeah, have a lot of stories to tell in terms of what it takes to get up and keep walking. I think in my career I've thought of it as a constant reinvention in some ways. And in a way, that mindset has helped me because I let go of barriers of saying, my batchmate, he's at this level there, or, people with 10 years of experience, where are they? I've just let go of that mindset completely. To kind of put into a little bit of a context, right? So my original career was in the R&D world, and I had joined AT&T Bell Labs after my PhD, and so I was in a career which was very, I would say, esoteric in some ways. Everybody was a PhD, everybody was writing papers and doing some interesting things. After a few years, I realized that this is not as much fun. I think I want to try something else. I want to see what my skills are, and I seem to be pretty good in communication. I seem to be pretty good in big picture things. So let me go back and do something else. Anyway, what I mean, so I went and did an MBA, and I started consulting world and came to India. So joined BCG, and my peers. People who my peers are at least 15 to 20 years younger than me. Everybody. It's odd because the partners in the firm are some of them younger than me. And there is not a single partner who has a kid. I had a kid. There are basically complete mismatch. right? In terms of where I am in my career and where my peers are. Most of my peers are IITs, maybe worked for a couple of years, IIMs, basically IIT, IIM, BCG. That's what, it's like it's an assembly line. I'm not even kidding you. Right? And so they don't know anything else. They don't know what is this woman doing here. With a PhD, she has a kid who lives in Bangalore, and she's in Mumbai, and why is she here? So a couple of people, like, people who were BCG, I would say chairman, etc., kind of got it. But there were, among the partners, there were only 2 partners who had a PhD. So even having a PhD had no frame of reference. What does a PhD even get you? Like, why, right? So where I was going was, in a way, I was like, I'm going to have fun with this. So we would have these, we would work hard, of course, crazy lives and long hours and everything. And then we would have these amazing parties. And BCG has a lot of money, so we'd have amazing parties, right? And none of the partners would get on the dance floor. Well, I'll get on the dance floor because all the youngsters are on the dance floor. And the reason is that I'm among the junior people, no? So I can get on the dance floor. And nobody would care one iota. Where I'm going is that, in a sense, I gave up that mental block of where do I need to be at a particular number of years in my career. I just gave it up. And I said, every maybe 5, 6, 7, 10 years, whatever, I'm going to completely reinvent myself. I'm going to become a new person completely, like I'm going to metamorphosize. So that becomes very liberating. When you are no longer comparing where your batchmates are, you're no longer comparing, where people of your age group are. It's just very liberating. And it allows you to learn, it allows you to do whatever you want. You can go do stuff. It doesn't matter what age you are and who cares. Actually, nobody really cares. So I think in many ways it has allowed me to keep learning and allowed me to even ask my team, people, very, very junior folks, teach me like, 101 of this subject. So it keeps allowing me to learn and be that person, because I'm allowing to have that person, be the teacher. And who doesn't love to be a teacher, right? And I'm the boss and they get to teach me. So that's wonderful, it works both ways. So along the way, from perspective of letting go of that mindset of wondering, where do I need to be at this stage of my career, there is no formula. It also comes that you have to be willing to put yourself out there. So one more story I will share is I had joined IBM and I had picked up a fairly large team of all MBAs, and if all MBAs think that they know everything, so I had this group of 150 odd MBAs, and for about almost a year and a half, they didn't have a manager, and I joined to lead this team, and so because they didn't have a manager, there was a lot of fiefdoms. There was the Delhi fiefdom, and then there was a Mumbai fiefdom, and there was they had the little empires had been built. Actually. So so I joined, and I was bringing the team together, trying to understand challenges the team is having. Almost a year and a half, they've not had a leader. A lot of angsts are there. Where are we going, etc. And then after a month or so, I said, let me go to Delhi and meet my team in person and get to understand them in person, get my second line leaders onboarded and everything. I go there, and there was one person in Delhi who was leading that local team, the local empire, right? And I know this was going to be a difficult one. In any case, so I went to Delhi and we had this meeting, and I could tell in the room that they are just like singing, let's see how long she lasts. Let's see how long she lasts. This is not going to work out. I said, okay. Nobody said, and obviously nobody will say this, right? But I could tell in the room. They were measuring me up. They were wondering what answers I had, and really how long will I last? Really, what am I made of? So after that fairly long, grueling day, etc., this guy who was the emperor of that empire, he said, let's go out for a drink. I said, sure, why don't we do that? So we went out, and we ordered drinks or whatever, right? And he just looks at me and says, you have no mandate. I don't know what you're doing here. I said, really? Enjoy the drink. And I left. I just left. I was like, I was not going to engage in that kind of a nonsense conversation. I just left. It was unnerving because he really did have an empire there. And I really did need to have that team. It was almost more than half of my team in Delhi that I needed to work with me, and I really did need to bring this together. And there was a business to run, and there were results to be delivered, and there were all of that. It was trial by fire. And it took me some time to prove my worth, get a few people to realize what I'm made of, myself deliver results, myself show a future for the team. Eventually, it just so turned out that our emperor had to get on a project in the US and messed it up so badly that he had to be said, you know what, you're not cut out for this. So yeah, it turned out that way, but what I'm saying is that there are a lot of battle scars, let's put it that way. Really am, I would say, battle-hardened warrior, but it continues, so thanks.
And I think the point around, speaking up, showing up, I think yet again, is so significant in your story.
Yeah.
So I have another question, but I'm just wanting to pause in this moment and check, do any of you have any questions for them? I mean, I'm happy to have a roaming mic if there's something you want to say or ask. This is a good time, and I'll just take a pause on my questions.
Is there a mic?
Yeah, one of these mics need to go down. Yeah, he's there. Yeah, this is good. Oh, you have a mic. Okay, super. Yeah. So anyone with a question, because I'd rather look at that now. And is there a question there? Yeah. Yeah, sure. Will you stand
hi.
up? It's just easier to see you. Yes. Who is the question for? Absolutely.
Hi, I'm Sneha. Yes, I've been very motivated to hear all your stories. I have been trying to step up in my career, but a lot of times, there is this Josh moment, and I'm like, yes, I'm going to step up. But then, the continuity is a big challenge because you get thrown with new challenges, and again, you have to step up, and then another challenge, and then again, you have to step up. You are passionate about things, but sometimes, you just sit on that step. What keeps you continuously going up, and what can motivate us to say that, continuously step up?
What a lovely question.
And
who
my
is this
question is
for?
open to anyone
Actually,
who
why
would
don't
like
you
to
just,
answer.
it's easier if you say who it is for, because then it just goes, it moves faster. Pick up the mic and answer.
Maybe Miss Arundhati?
Arundhati, great. How do you not just sit on the step, but keep moving?
No, I do. Many times I do. And actually, many nights I promise I'm never going to step up again. But then after night comes morning.
Yeah.
And then you wake up. Yeah. No, I think it's a very important question. It's so frustrating, especially what you very beautifully left out, actually, is that while you're stepping up, people around you are constantly judging you for it. Both, some positively, but also negatively, constantly. She's so aggressive. She always wants all the attention. She always wants the best job.
Yeah.
She's always there. Why is she always on the front line? Or she's a front bencher. There are all different ways of, ridiculing people as well. So stepping up becomes more difficult. I think 3 things keep me sane. One is self-care. You can't step up constantly. You need to recharge, yeah? You need to step down to step up. So you step down, you back off, you recharge, whatever works for you. Drinks, friends, vacation, reading a book alone, just quiet time, whatever it is. Meditation, prayers for some people, whatever works. So that recharge is really important. The second thing that I found important is solidarity and sisterhood. It's really worked for me. You go find that sister who's going to do it for you, who's going to get your back. And I'm biased towards women, so
Yeah,
I
me too.
will say sisterhood. Go find that woman who's going to, every time you break, you fall, you scatter, somebody is going to be there to mop you up a little bit and put you back together, scream at you at times, tell you how stupid you've been. But that mop up is important. So that solidarity has been very important. And the third thing for me that's worked is to see everything as, and also I guess myself, as like just a very important, very tiny part of a very large something, which I still don't fully understand, but very significant, but very small. So that makes you put everything else in perspective. The world will not burn out if you don't step up tomorrow. It's okay. Like, take 2 extra days, yeah. Yeah, so that works for me.
Lovely.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I have a question.
I love the step down to step up. And I also love the sisterhood piece of your answer. The last chapter of my book is about that. Yeah, because we really, really, I find, need that. Yeah.
And sit on the step for some time and
Yes.
enjoy the scenery a little
Sit
bit
on
as
the
well,
step. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, beautiful.
I have a
Yeah.
question. Can I ask this question?
Yes.
My question is to Reeth Abraham. Actually, you belong to that generation where there were a lot of women athletes like P.T. Usha, Ashwini Nachappa, and also Shiny Wilson, who were doing great and who were earning laurels for the country. So there must definitely be having some step-up moments for all these lady athletes who were doing better in world athletics than as compared to their male counterparts. So what do you think was the common thread? What were those step-up moments for, so that so many ladies who were doing, excelling and earning laurels for the country, as per your experience?
It was a big challenge for us women athletes in the 80s to come up in large numbers and represent the country and do what we were doing. But I think the first credit should go to our parents for allowing us to get out there and, for months together we stayed out of our homes in places like Patiala and Delhi to achieve our dreams. So that was scary for them, but we had to do it to reach a certain standard in our lives. No cell phones, yes. But in a way, I think it was good. Without cell phones, I think we did much better than what the kids are doing now because they are spending all the time on their cell phones. Because Sindhu, I remember, she gave up her cell phone for almost 5 months before she won the world championship. 5 months she did not touch her cell phone. So for us, it was pure passion, and we were all together, had each other's back, and at that point of time, it was during the 80s when we started. We have to represent the country at the 82 Asian Games. There was nothing else that we had in mind. We were there for 3 months in Patiala. We come back for a break for 15 days, and how? We have to travel by bus from Patiala to Delhi and take the train from Delhi to Bangalore, which took us more than 36 to 40 hours. There were no flight charges for us. I mean, we didn't have the money. The parents couldn't support us. The government didn't support us. But we did it. Everybody did the same way. So we just wanted to do it. So after the 82 Asian Games, it was the 85 Asian Championships, and the next was the 86 Asian Games. So the entire lot, we were together in the camps, and when we compete, we come for the national champions together. And even now, it's amazing that that lot of 20, 25 of us during the 80s are still remembered now. Everybody asks us, what is it that, you were driven by? What is it that was driven that people still remember you all? It was just passion. If you want to do something in your life, it has to be passion-driven.
Yeah, awesome.
It's only that.
Beautiful. And I think what Reet, you're calling passion is really what I phrase as what do you really deeply want to care about? Yeah, what is it that you absolutely want to commit your life to?
No, and I want to add to that.
Yeah.
I was on the top I started when I was 76, and when I gave up, it was 92. The end of 91, 92, I finished. And the amount of money I made during that period, for my Arjuna Award, I got 1 lakh. And for my other Grand Prix and other events that I won, I must have got another lakh. That's all in my 17 years of career. So we were not looking to make money out of it. It was pure passion.
Thanks for that. I think we can take one more question.
Oh, I don't have a
many more
question.
questions.
Amazing story.
Yeah,
I don't
okay.
have a question. I do want to share something though.
Okay.
I see a little bit of me, Reet, in your not complaining at a time in my life. I see a little bit of me in you, Rohini, in that hardened leader, and often wonder if being called aggressive is good or bad. I see a little bit of me in wondering why I took so long to figure out whether I'd fit in a particular chair. And I loved your way of describing that at some point of time you'll realize that you designed the chair. I loved your story, Sai. Thank you so much for bringing this together as an evening. Lovely.
Thank you, Divya. I certainly want this man here to have the mic.
Good. So,
And that one also.
yeah, my question is to Arundhati. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek because, I've heard you express before as, unhappy as to why a certain panel is filled only with men, right? And coming from the perspective that women's issues are not issues of women alone, and that, and that it's already been made that, there is a feminine side to everyone. So why is it that spaces like these very often tend to be, again, packed without even a minority representation of what's the male perspective? Not that we want to poke our nose everywhere, right? But don't you think there's value, given that we all need to coexist, in at least having the male voice represented in these spaces and discussions?
It is, I agree. It is. But I would also turn this question a little bit towards the audience and ask you to look around. And I see maximum women in the audience. Yeah. So while at one end I say, yes, we must have, and also we are looking at gender as just men and women. That's not true. Yeah. I mean, we'll ask the trans question, we'll ask the multiple spectrum of gender question. Absolutely. Then. Actually, we have to. Because we can't just be feminist today. We're bound to be, we look at the queer, look at how that affects our beings as well. But also, I've often wondered, I was actually thinking of asking Sai that, why do only women come to listen to women now? I mean, if it was a panel of, say, some financial advisory with 3 men sitting here, and then this room will have so many more men. Or say if it was a man's something, leadership, where there were only men, there would be many more. So it's, I think, a bit of both sides. I don't think if there was a man here, and we were talking about women's leadership, the audience composition would change either. So I think both need to change in some ways.
And honestly, this invite went out to a whole lot of people, men and women, and yet it's interesting to see what the audience is.
But it's not just this one.
Sure.
I mean, one looks at women's film festivals.
Yeah.
One looks at all kinds. I mean, in the arts, you have so much of this.
Yeah.
And it's...
That's my point. Like women's issues and events, the narrative has been framed as for women.
No, it isn't. Women don't say that. But it is true. I do agree that we have to make space in a place that is already unequal. You have to make that special place. That I have to say. because if it was equal, then we didn't need to have so much of conversation, right? So we have to make place for women separately to begin with.
And having said that, I think, again, it's the last chapter in my book about the significance of making men our allies. Yeah, I think there's too much of a conversation that's only centered around women. And I think that responsibility is also for women, yeah, to go out there and have more allies and bring more people, bring more men into the conversation. I think it has gotten a little skewed. That's what I noticed. So, so I think that
But Sai, there's another thing I would like, even though I might sense this might be slightly provocative, but I'll still put it out there, that the responsibility of making men as allies is also ours. Why don't we live with them?
I'll tell you.
I mean, in the sense, come on. I mean, we live with them.
Arundhati, even if we live with them, they're not always our allies.
No, they're not. So I'm saying, अरे यार कितना responsibility ये भी हमारा क्या? So
I agree. I take that point. And yet, Arundhati, in a lot of spaces where discussions are happening around the women, I find women are also not openly inviting men into the conversation.
we were having a very interesting conversation, Rohini and I, sitting there, saying how patriarchy supremely affects both men and women.
Yes.
And we were saying that, okay, more women, obviously, but men too. I mean, today so many
absolutely.
men are enjoying the fact that they're sharing parenting. It's brought a whole lot of difference to their lives in the way they can express themselves, see
Absolutely.
themselves.
Yeah.
Men can cry.
Yes. Yeah. Men can do a lot, actually.
They can do a lot.
And
They can be in
yes.
touch with their emotion, express their emotion. So much that patriarchy didn't
Allow.
allow you to do.
Yes.
So, why not figure out these benefits yourself, yeah?
TK, we'll go with that for now. Yeah. All right. So there's one more question there, and then we'll move on. No, here. There's a mic needed here. Oh, you already have the mic.
Yeah.
Okay, go on.
Hi, thank you for an extremely very inspiring but very funny stories, and and my question is for Reeth, and what a charming life of adventure you have led. So thank you for sharing your stories. But what I'm going to ask is actually very connected to the previous conversation, which is to say that you said, oh, women are very good at multitasking, so you can go and have this passion. But not all women are good at multitasking, actually. So by kind of framing it that all women are good multitaskers, we are leaving out women who are not that, and then the ecosystem doesn't support women who are that, and then how do they pursue their passions? And where do men step up, or the ecosystem steps up, so that non-multitasking women can also pursue their passions?
Sure. Good question.
I think because I didn't have a choice, I had to work because I didn't have money to support myself. I loved my sport, and I had to go out and do my training. I couldn't afford a cook, so I had to cook. So I had to do it all myself, and I had to figure out a way to do it, right? So when you have everything being thrown at you, you figure out things to handle it. But if you have something around you which you think, okay, it's not necessary for me to do that, I can postpone it, I don't have to do it, then you keep postponing it. I think it's very important that you prioritize your life and tell yourself what is it that you want out of this life. It wasn't easy. There were times that I had to lock myself in the toilet and cry. But I knew what I wanted in life, so I had to go after it. Right? It's all in your hands. There's nobody who can tell you what you want out of your life. It's only you. And you let yourself go, and you're gone. And you let others dictate you, and that's finished. So you have to be a little selfish with what you want. I know it's expected out of most women that these are the things that you have to do. There is no way about it, no two ways about it. And but it's up to you what you want out of your lives. Right?
So multitasking or no multitasking, you're saying this is really significant.
No,
that you be
what
clear.
you want to do, what you want out of your lives.
Right.
If you had no choice, then you will multitask, right? Because if I could, not go to work and somebody could support me, I would have finished my workouts in the morning, which I did for 2 hours, gone back home, slept for 2 hours, and then wake up, around 4 o'clock and go for my workout again and engage a cook, which I couldn't. So when you're pushed somewhere to do certain things, you will do it. And I think it's not, I'm saying women are better at multitasking than the men. If men are pushed to do that, even they would do it. It's just not the women.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Okay.
So, many congratulations once again, Shailaka. I'm Shailaka's niece.
Okay.
So, and when the book was out and up for sale on Amazon, I picked it up immediately and I've read the book. And it was, I must tell you that it's a very wholesome book for to step up really in your personal and professional space, and very well written and thought of and experimented. So my question is for you, Shailaka. What I want to understand is that initially when we started the session, you said, you have to get in touch with your feminine side. So I exactly want to understand what you mean, if you can name that for me, and how do you translate it in your personal and professional space to step up? Like, how do you put it into action?
Sure. So in my work as a coach and working with a lot of senior leaders, I found, especially working with women leaders, that they had shaped their life and their career progression and how they were going to be successful around seeing what the men in their organizations did. So if there was a certain alpha, aggressive energy, that's how they ran, their meetings. That's how they met people. So if there was a distance from the team and you don't, get so pally and you keep emotions and everything out of conversations, then that's how they designed their leadership style, right? So I see all of this as very much, the male principle of how to lead and how to get things done and how to problem solve. But I think the feminine principle is much more around collaboration, is much more around process, which means it's not like I just look at the old books and see how decisions were made. I sit and see, how does this fit in this moment? Given where I am and the people and the circumstances, how is moving like this making sense? So the feminine principle would ask this question rather than just look at what has been done before. Let's see what predecessors have done. That's one way of looking at problem solving. Similarly, so I think collaboration, learning to listen to yourself and see, is this a good way to move right now? Is this a good way to solve this issue? I find often leads to a lot of creative ideas, and this is, again, very much the feminine principle. The other, which I think is so significant for today's world, is the principle of just, looking at just bottom line and profits and numbers, and you don't look at sustainability. You don't look at whether this is good for everybody. You don't look at whether this is good for the world. You never ask those questions, yeah? And that, again, is very much the feminine principle. To see, is this a win for everyone? Yeah, is this a good way to move? Is this benefiting? I think this is very, very much the feminine principle. So it's really not just looking at I, me, myself, something on the top, and that's everything, right? So in fact, if you look at the world today, if you look at conflicts, wars, if you look at including aggression, greed, all of this, I think it's very much around that I, me, myself principle. I couldn't be caring about what happens to others at all. So I think this, again, is very much the feminine principle, that one looks at ecology, at what makes sense. You look at sustainability, you look at fairness, you look at what is equitable. So I think these are all very much feminine principles, and I'm sure you'd agree, this is what the world needs today, right? A lot of the disharmony that we see in the world, a lot of the conflicts that we see in the world are very much coming from the, from the very masculine principle. And there's been a big tilt, and therefore I think so much when we read today, they talk about the future being feminine, because this is really what is needed for even the world to balance out, right? For have and have-nots, and for there to be an equitable distribution, including of incomes. Yeah, this is what the world needs, and this, again, is the feminine principle. So I think when you think of bringing it into your life or profession, I would say, ask these questions, yeah? How does this fit for me? Is this fair to everybody? Instead of being aggressive, can I still be respectful and still speak my mind? Yeah, these are very practical ways, I think, of bringing this principle into our life and our work.
If I may just add to the comments you were making.
Sure.
So in the corporate world, what I'm seeing is that what you're calling the feminine side, I think there is growing understanding and in fact, I would say even training for senior leaders to think about empathy, to think about coaching, think about listening. So I mean, I've over the last several years have been through, I would say, multiple such ways to think about. And if I were my technologist hat, right, the area I work on is in artificial intelligence. And one of the things which is becoming very big in that whole space is the ethics of it. And the ethics of it, the fairness, accountability, inclusion, all of those things are making people step back and say that the way in which we have worked, the society has worked, if we encode that into machines, we will not like what the world will look like. So people are really stepping back and re-examining our values and the ways in which
Thank
we
you
work.
for adding that, Rohini. That's beautiful. Yeah, really lovely. So I'm really looking at time. We're way past. But never mind. I think this has just been so satisfying and stimulating. Thank you very much for joining me in this conversation. So maybe we'll just walk back down and then we'll have the last piece of this evening. Thank you very much.
The sun is high above us, or the moon is full aglow. What better than to sit by the river and watch it flow?
For now is the time to write words on sand and drink in the wisdom of far ancient lands.
For the heavens soar above us, and the earth lies still below.
What better than to sit by the river and watch it flow? Good evening, everybody, and welcome again to the last part of what has been a wonderful, wonderful evening. We're going to make a switch, like Reva said, to really look at what traditional tales talk about stepping up, essentially because we believe that a lot of these traditional stories have moved over hundreds and thousands of years because in them is the wisdom that is as relevant to our times as it was probably 100,000 years ago.
And so, for us, often when we are drawn to stories, traditional stories, we really see them as metaphors and symbols, and look at a lot of these stories as an opportunity for us to sit back, let these images play out for us, and maybe some of these images will speak to us, maybe some of these images will remind us of something, and maybe some of these images will inspire something in a very symbolic way. And that's really our hope this evening. And we want to open this evening with a story that's written by J.K. Rowling. She writes short stories as well. And we don't want to tell too much about this story. We want you to hear the story. But just to give you a little teaser, what this story is about, it's about what happens when 3 women and 1 man set out on an adventure.
So in a land far, far, far away, on top of a hill, surrounded by an enchanted garden and protected by high walls, flowed the fountain of fair fortune. And it was believed that whoever could bathe in the waters of this fountain would enjoy good luck and fortune for the rest of their lives. And it was only one day of the year, the longest day when one person was allowed access into this garden. And it was believed that if this person made their way to the fountain, they would be happy for the rest of their lives. And it is said that each year on the appointed day, hundreds and thousands of people gathered around this enchanted garden, hoping and praying that that year it would be their turn. Men, women, the young and the old, the rich and the poor, those with magical means and those without, everybody gathered in the dark much before sunrise. And that particular year, 3 witches, each with her burden of woe, gathered there and met in the outskirts of the crowd. And as they waited to pass the time, they decided to share with each other what was really troubling them in their lives.
The first witch, she went by the name Asha. And she was struck by a disease that no healer seemed to be able to cure. And she was really hoping that if she got a chance to bathe in these waters of this fountain, the fountain waters would cure her of her malady and grant her a long and a happy life.
The second witch, she went by the name Althea, and she had been robbed of her home, her gold, and even her wand by an evil sorcerer. And she hoped that the fountain's waters would help her get out of her poverty and her powerlessness.
And the third witch, her name was Amata. And she suffered from a broken heart, for she was deserted by a man who she loved the most. And she thought nothing in this world could help her overcome her grief. And she hoped that being in the waters of this fountain would really cure her of her grief and longing and give her a chance to move on in life. And so, there they were, these 3 witches talking, pitying each other, and getting connected with what was mattering to each of them the most. And they decided to make a pact. And they decided that should chance befall upon them, and if either one of them had an opportunity to be near the fountain waters and enter the enchanted garden, then somehow they would find each other, unite, and take each other into that garden. The sky was rent with the first ray of the morning sun, and a chink in the wall opened. And no sooner than that, the entire crowd rushed towards that opening in the wall, all of them screaming, shrieking their claim upon the fountain's benison. From behind the garden wall, mysterious snake-like creepers appeared, and they moved their way through the pressing crowds, and they went through the crowds and wrapped themselves up around the ankle of Asha. Asha immediately grabbed the hand of Althea, and Althea clung hard to the cloak that Amata was wearing. And Amata, well, she was a little clumsy, and she found herself completely fumbling and tumbling over the armor of a very sad-looking knight who sat on a bone-thin horse. Well, anyway, the creeper tugged onto the 3 witches, and in went the 3 witches into the garden, and along with them was dragged off this knight. Furious, angry screams rose up that morning in the air, and then silence surrounded them as the wall behind them closed, and they found themselves inside the premises of this enchanted garden. Asha and Althea were really mad at Amata. As it is, it was going to be such a difficult decision to make which one of the 3 of us would be entering the water of that fountain. And now you have this 4th person joining us.
Sir Luckless, as this knight was known in the outside world, well, he realized he had absolutely no skill or magic, and there was no way that he would get a chance to bathe in the fountain. So very generously, he offered to take himself out of the garden. But at that, Amata grew really angry at him. "Oh, you faint heart," she chided him. "Pick up your sword and help us meet our goal." And so it came that morning, the 3 witches and the knight made their way down sunlit paths, surrounded by the most exquisite flowers and herbs and plants that they had ever seen. And it seemed like a rather nice, easy walk until they reached the foot of the hill that housed that fountain. And right there, blocking their path, was a white, monstrous worm. And when the worm heard the footsteps, it turned its face towards this group and whispered, "Pay me the proof of your pain."
The proof of your pain.
Sir Luckless drew out his sword and he tried to kill the worm, but the steel simply snapped. And Althea started throwing stones, and Amata and Asha tried every curse that they knew. But the worm just wouldn't move. Meanwhile, the sun was getting higher and higher in the sky. And seeing that, Asha despairingly began to weep. And when the worm heard the crying, it slid closer to her and started drinking in her tears. And then, its thirst assuaged, it simply disappeared into a hole in the ground.
And now the path ahead was clear. And the four of them were very sure and very confident that they would make it to the top of the enchanted hill before midday. And off they went, trekking onto that hill. And they walked and walked and walked. And at some point, when they reached about midway, they looked ahead of them and they saw as if there were some inscriptions carved into the rocks. And when they looked closely, they read that the inscription said, "Pay me the fruit of your labor."
The fruit of your labor.
Sir Luckless immediately pulled out the only gold coin he had on him and he threw it on the ground. But of course, they were on a hill and it was a slope, and so the gold coin rolled away. They stood there not knowing what else to do. They continued to walk and walk and walk on that hill, what seemed like many hours, until they realized that they had not moved a step ahead. They were now beginning to feel disheartened because when they looked up, the sun had crossed the midpoint and was now gradually moving towards the west. And at this rate, they would never make it to the fountain. And they were losing all hope except Althea, who would not stop. And in fact, she kept walking even faster and faster and putting on as much energy, not believing that anything could stop them, even though she did not move even a step further. She just kept going at it. And she told them, "Hold on to your courage, folks. Don't give up yet." And as she said that, she wiped her brow, and a drop of sweat twinkled onto the inscription. And the inscription disappeared. The path was clear for them. Now they knew they would get to the top of the mountain, of the top of the enchanted hill, and off they went with renewed energy till at last they reached the top. And there in the distance, for the first time, they saw the waters, the crystal-like waters of this enchanted fountain. Ah, there it stood, magnificent, glorious against the evening sun, amidst a bower of fruits and trees. And as they moved closer to it, they realized something, that there was actually a stream that ran around the summit, which came between them and the fountain. And if they needed to get to the fountain, they had to find a way to cross the stream. And when they looked into the clear waters of the stream, they saw a smooth rock with the inscription that said, "Pay me the treasures of your past."
The treasures of your past. And Sir Luckless just put his shield into the water and he tried to cross, but he started to sink and the witches had to pull him out. And each of the witches tried to step into the water, but they just couldn't cross. And meanwhile, the sun was now slowly moving into the west, down into the horizon. And all four of them thought that they really needed to ponder on what that inscription meant. It was Amata who realized. And she used her wand to pull out all the memories that she had inside her of the happy times she had spent with her lover. And she dropped those memories into the water, and as the water took those memories away, stepping stones emerged, and all four of them could cross over. And against the setting sun, there they stood, in front of this fountain now shimmering against the orange sky. It was now time to decide who would get to bathe in the waters. But just then, Asha, who was already quite sick and exhausted by the journey she had to make, she just collapsed on the ground and it looked like she could die. And her friends offered to carry her into the fountain, but she begged to be left alone. Seeing this, Althea started running around, plucking every herb, every shrub that she thought was promising, and she made it into a paste. Sir Luckless offered his gourd of water, and they made it into a potion and offered it to Asha. And Asha drank in the potion, and she stood up. And not just that, every symptom of her malady seemed to disappear. I'm cured, she said. I have no need for this fountain. Let Althea bathe.
Althea was too busy gathering herbs into her apron at that point of time, and she looked up and she said, well, if I can cure a disease like this, I think I'm going to be making a lot of gold for the rest of my life. So it should not be me who should be in that fountain water. I think it should be Amata. And Sir Luckless, he went down on his knees and very graciously pointed Amata towards the fountain waters. But Amata, she just shook her head. For she had realized that in giving away all those memories, she had realized how cruel and how heartless her lover had been. And that for her, it was happiness enough to have him out of her life. And so she turned to Sir Luckless and she said, you know what, Sir Luckless, I think it should be you who should be in those in those waters. And so the decision was made. And that evening, against the setting sun, Sir Luckless in his clunky armor walked into the waters of the fountain. He couldn't believe his luck. He was giddy with excitement of all those hundreds and thousands of people gathered out there in the morning. He was the lucky one to be in the waters of this fountain. And there, against the setting sun, he emerged out of the waters with the light of triumph surrounding him. And with his newfound courage, he threw himself in his rusty armor at the feet of Amata. And he told her how beautiful she was, how she was the most beautiful woman, the kindest and the most thoughtful woman that he had ever come across. And Amata smiled knowingly. She gave him her hand, lifted him up, and that evening, all four of them walked down happily, down that enchanted hill, out of the enchanted forest, and went on to live for many, many long years, for many, many years, and very, very happily.
And nobody ever knew or even suspected that the fountain's water had no magic after all. The end.
You want me to open it? I can open it. Okay, so our next story and our last story for this evening is a creation myth. Creation myth are stories that are said to have been sort of put together when human civilizations first started speaking and, oral traditions came into play. And this is a creation myth originally told by the White Mountain Apache people. And the version that we are very inspired to share here is a version that was translated by mythologist Michael Mead. And that's the version we bring here today. So, we also thought of how, we've been speaking about the feminine energy all of this evening. And this is a myth in a way that takes our attention to how the feminine energy is constantly balancing the order and the disorder that we see around us. So here we go. Long, long time ago, people have said, old people have said, that there is a cave, a very special cave. For in this cave lies the knowledge of all the workings and the wonders of this world. And the native people say that this cave can still be found today if one decided to look for it. Not too far away, they say. For this cave is said to be tucked away into the side of a mountain. However, no one seems to find it anymore. Despite all the highways and the byways, the thoroughfares and the back roads that seem to crisscross the entire planet, despite all the maps that want to define and detail every piece of surface on this planet, no one could still find this cave. That's too sad, they say. For in this cave lies the genuine knowledge of how to act when dark times come around again and the earth slips away from order and tips away towards chaos.
Inside this cave lives an old woman who is unaffected by the passage of time and untouched by the chaos and the strife of everyday life. She attends to other things, for she has a different sense of time and the capacity for a deep, deep vision. She spends most of her time weaving in that cave where light and shadows play. And she is working on creating the most beautiful, the most exquisite piece of garment that this world has ever seen. She's been at this weaving for a long time now, they say. For now, she has woven a magnificent, elegant cloak, and all that is left is to make a fringe along the edge of that cloak. She's decided to use porcupine quills for the fringe, for she likes the idea of something that could poke you and cause you pain to be the element of beauty. And in order to use those quills, she has to bite hard and flatten them so that she could weave them in. And from years of biting and years of weaving, her teeth are reduced to nubs that barely rise above her gums. And yet, she sits there, patiently, weaving the fringe.
The only time she interrupts her weaving is when she has to get up and go behind the cave, for there is a cauldron with some soup simmering on it. And so she has to walk up behind the cave in order to stir the soup, for the old cauldron hangs over a great fire. And as far as the old woman can remember, this fire has existed forever now. Perhaps it is the oldest thing in this world. And occasionally the old woman remembers that she has to get up and stir the soup over the fire. For you see, the soup contains some very special ingredients. It contains all the seeds and all the roots that turn into herbs and grains and plants that cover the surface of this earth. And if she does not stir the soup, then it is quite likely that the fire would scorch the ingredients. And if that were to happen, there is no telling what trouble would get unleashed into this world.
So in a way, the old weaver needs to balance her time. She has to balance her time between the weaving and the stirring of that soup. In a way, you could say that she is responsible for weaving things together and also stirring things up. And she senses when the time is right. And when it is time, she leaves her weaving on the ground and moves all the way across the cave right to the back to where the cauldron is. And because she's old and tired from all her labors, she moves slowly. And it takes her a while to make her way back to that cauldron.
And so as this old woman shuffles slowly back behind the cave, she leaves her weaving on the floor. And as soon as she is away, a black dog watches her. This black dog has been there all the while, seemingly asleep It wakes up when the weaver turns her attention from one task to another. And as the old weaver stirs the soup at the back, the black dog gets up, goes up to where the weaving lies, and then it pulls on a loose thread. And as the dog tugs on the thread, the cloak begins to unravel. And because one thread is linked to another and to another, very soon the exquisite cloak has turned into a chaotic mess on the floor.
So when the old woman returns to pick up her handiwork, all she finds on that floor is a tangled mess of threads. Where there was once an elegant cloak, now is just chaos. The entire cloak is undone, the fringe has come apart, her entire work of creation has turned to naught. She just stands there, looking at that tangled mess. She ignores the presence of that dog as she sits looking at the broken design, the distorted patterns on the ground. Then she bends down. She slowly picks up a thread. And she starts her weaving again. And as she pulls thread after thread after thread, in her vision, she one more time sees new patterns and new designs that her old, knowing hands slowly start to bring to life. And as she continues her weaving, that cloak that she was weaving once upon a time is completely forgotten. And she now creates a whole new pattern and a whole new design as she sits to weave the most beautiful, the most exquisite piece of garment that this world has ever seen. And this is a story that does not end.
Thank you.